I am free in the Spirit. Yes, I'm only here for God. I am free in the Spirit, and I'm only here for God. Send prayerful thoughts to Reverend Gary and to Linda Gillespie, both of whom, as you know, have tested positive. I'm glad to be here as a last-minute substitute, but I know I'm only a substitute, and I'm grateful to be here. But I do want to be mindful that I'm here because our brother is sick, and we pray for a speedy healing. I also need to start by apologizing that I need to leave immediately after the service. Months ago, I was scheduled to help lead a interfaith pride worship service at 1 o'clock in San Antonio. And you know how, anyway, so I don't mean to be rude, but immediately following the service, I'll be leaving. But I will be here a lot, apparently, now that I'm the music director here. I'll be here most Sundays. Thank you. And if you'll bear with me, I'd like to start with a ritual remembrance. It's something I've done in my congregation every Father's Day for 30 years at the Celebration Circle of San Antonio. And it's a way of remembering fathers. So are there any fathers here, people? Either your own biological kids or adopted or stepkids, okay. So I'm going to invite you each to stand in place and speak your name and speak the name of your children and speak the name of your father and your father's father and your father's father as far back as you can remember, but to honor your father and his father. I'll model it. I will speak our words, and then I'll ring my Tibetan bowl. And then I'll bring the microphone out to any man who's standing. And don't feel like you have to, but this is an invitation. So, my name is Rudolf. I'm the father of Matteo Bear Harst and Sarah von der Voorde Kattenburg. I am the son of Bernard Marcel Harst, the son of Bernard Harst, the son of Ferdinand Harst.
I am son of John Christian Bergman. His father was Peter Bergman. His father was Christian Bergman.
I'm Wes Morrison. I have two children, Megan, who has a son, Jackson, son, Ryan. My dad was William Autry Morrison, and his father was Hill Morrison.
I'm William Rex Lovejoy. I have a daughter, Josie Ann Marie Lovejoy. My father was Paul Rex Lovejoy. His father was Rex Lovejoy. My other grandfather was William Dingler. My daughter has a daughter.
Thank you for helping me invoke the Father presence here in the room. And for us all, including the folks online, I invite you to take a moment to remember your father. To remember the joys you experienced with your father. And also the sorrows you experienced with your father. And now, take a moment to feel, think about, remember the rewards, the gifts you received from your Father. And finally, if you're willing, take a moment to reflect on the challenges, the difficulties you had with your Father, or He with you. Thank you for doing that with me. I'll spend the next few minutes thinking about my father, our fathers, and the possibility of invoking a true family reunion here this morning. I have to start with two caveats. One is that my father is very much present in my heart this morning. He died 2 years ago, about 2 miles from here. He lived his entire adult life from the time he was 27 within about 2 miles of this particular spot here in New Braunfels. First across the river and then on this side of the river. He was the administrator at the Eden Home for the elderly up on the hill there on Land Drive. And I lived a life of service. He was truly a godly man who served Christ in the best way he understood at all times. He never talked much about his religion, but he lived it fully. He was that guy. The first one there, that anytime needed chairs needed set up, he'd be there to set them up. And he'd be there to put them back down afterwards, stay until the door was clocked. That was him. And I love him and I honor him. I feel his presence here. But I also had some difficulties with him. And he with me. It was not an easy relationship for most of my life. I have to acknowledge that I loved him deeply and he loved me. It was clear on the one hand. On the other hand, I only heard him say that once, and that was on his deathbed. I, on the other hand, have a now 23-year-old son. I've told him I love him every single day that I've ever been anywhere near him or on the phone with him or on internet. I hug him every chance I get. My father never hugged me. But that was a different time, you know. In the 1950s, my father and I related most often through a leather belt, contacting my bottom. He wasn't alone in that. He spanked us much less than the neighboring fathers. It was just how it was done in the 50s. And if fathers weren't spanking us, then the coaches and the principal and the teachers lined up for the privilege. And now any one of them would probably be arrested for what they did then. Not better or worse, it's just a different time. I would like to acknowledge that in my lifetime, that it has changed, and I personally am glad for that. I right here, you know, in Braunfels Senior High School, the coach would gladly make boys' butts bleed. It's normal. And that's no longer the case, and that's such an incredible blessing. But it's also difficult for our culture to have absorbed that. In 50 years' time, to have gone from a place where spare the rod, spoil the child was a watchword, a bumper sticker, to a place where we wouldn't think of that. 50 years ago, it was normal for a father to be distant and never hug a child. I don't know anybody who got hugged by their dads. And now it's quite normal. I'd like to hope, certainly in our household and anyone, all my friends. that the father expresses affection openly. And before I go any further, I got to take a minute also to acknowledge, speak out into the space that I'm an addict. I'm in recovery. I learned some years ago, however, that I'm not addicted to a substance as much as I'm addicted to anger and judgment and superiority that it gives me when I'm angry and judgmental. There is a part of me that just loves being mad at them, those because then I get to feel superior and better than. There's a part of me that really loves to get really, really mad and blame them, because then I don't have to take the blame. And so it's hard for me to continue talking about father and family and to be real and honest without acknowledging that that's my cross to bear. Hopefully you don't have that. Or maybe you have some part of it. I do know that I cannot lift up in love and light and positivity my father or anybody else without also acknowledging there is a shadow side, always active and always present. At least that's how I understand. Okay, so back to fathers and to the idea that we're here this morning, I think, by divine appointment to experience family reunion, to feel the joy and the blessing of the family of our origin. I think that's a very powerful joy and a very powerful blessing, and it doesn't always feel good for a lot of people. I know there's at least one person in here who has had a problematic experience with your family of origin. Because you're human, right? And it's not just that. This morning we're focusing on father. There's also the mother energy to be considered. There's also siblings to be considered. Now, all of them were human, just like us. And all of them had failings and unfulfilled needs and desires that they would project onto us. That's the nature of what is to be human. And we in turn, projected our anger and our needs and our unfulfilled desires on others. That's all messy and it's all in there. And it all needs to be acknowledged before we can honestly lift up into the light the ideal of love binding us all. Not making sense to anybody? And I know there's some people in here who love doing inner work and know exactly what I'm talking about. And there's maybe a couple people going like, when's this going to be over? About 15 minutes, hopefully. But bear with me a little bit longer as we deal with the possibility that there is a deep cultural wounding around fatherhood and being the child of a father in our culture at a time when our culture is trying to decide what to do with spare the rod, spoil the child. At a time when there is still a whole bunch of uncertainness of how to be a man in the world. And our fathers had to deal with that, and we, in the succeeding generations, are having to deal with that. Having said that, our willingness, my willingness, your willingness, our willingness to be real about our relationships to our family of origin makes it possible for there to be more love and light in the world and more space for healing and goodness. Yes? No? Maybe? So? Yeah. I know I'm going to a deep place, and I appreciate you going with me because I, myself, feel so blessed and empowered by my Father when I allow myself to think of that as a blessing, as an empowerment, as opposed to dwelling on those things that were problematic in our relationship. And there were things in our relationship that were deeply problematic for many years, mostly because of me. Or, I don't know. All I know is that when I stand in my power as a man of God and name and claim the space I choose to be in mindfully with my Father and my mother and my 5 brothers, that I come from a happier, healthier, more powerful space. I like to think of the story of a little kid who was going to the county fair with his parents, and they were having a good time, or going and riding all the rides and playing all the games and watching the livestock show. And then it came time to have a snack, and the little boy got a cotton candy. He was sitting there eating his cotton candy, and a friendly stranger came up and said, "What's a little boy like you doing with such a big cotton candy?" He looked up at him and said, "Mister, I'm a whole lot bigger on the inside than I look on the outside." I believe we're all much bigger on the inside than we look on the outside and act on the outside. There is an inner Christ, an inner goddess, an inner light that calls us to that bigness again and again. And I want to live from that place of bigness. I've played from my place of being a small 2-year-old child who was scared of the world and not good enough and not smart enough. And I hoping that somebody would approve of me and hug me and say, "I love me." Enough with that. I want to stand and say, I am a child of God. I am loved and loving. I've always been loved and I'm always loving. That's the place I choose to come from. And I forget on a regular basis. Which is why it's helpful to gather with my tribe of conscious students of unity principles, of new thought principles, and reflect with each other and for each other the truth that we are bigger on the inside than we look on the outside. And that we all have within us a 2-year-old child who's still wanting somehow more time, more attention, more approval, more mommy, more. And we're all infinite beings capable of the full and rich expression of spirit in the moment. It's not one or the other, it's both and. And one of the tools that helps us get there is expressed very clearly in this wonderful article, Embrace Forgiveness. That is the chapter in this week from the Living Abundantly book that you've been studying as a congregation. And I love Reverend Adams' reminder that the practice of forgiveness is something that must be approached on both the spiritual and the human level. On the spiritual level, there is no need to forgive because there's nothing to forgive. Everything's perfect. That's always been perfect. Will always be perfect in the fullness of Christ. That's the spiritual level. And it's important to name and claim and study and process. But at the human level, that's where forgiveness is needed. That's where it's important to face into those places where there is still some part of us that wants to be separate from and judgmental of and a victim of. And it's that place that we're going to work with a little bit here today. We often hear the phrase, forgive and forget. But it's important to forgive and remember. I love that. That's for me, that was the most powerful phrase in this reading. I don't know who's had a chance to read it yet, but the idea that it's powerful, it's nice, it's good to forgive and forget. But it's empowering to forgive and remember. Remember meaning to put our members all back into the whole. You know, this is a member of my body, this arm. You know, the definition of a limb is also a member. This is a member of my body. This is a member of my body. But as I remember, my arms and my legs and my heart and my head align, as I remember my wholeness, then I have the space and the opportunity to use the tool of forgiveness to let go of any contraction that got housed in my body, mind, and spirit in the past, and open it up in the present so I can live more fully in the future. Ideally, on a good day. On a bad day, I'm still a little 2-year-old. What are you gonna do? But on a good day, I remember that forgiving another is not condoning hurtful words or actions. It is freeing yourself from the power that person's situation or feeling holds over you. Once free of the pain, we can consider the pain within those we believe hurt us. Once I'm free of my pain, which I have gotten freedom through my willingness to forgive, once I've gotten free, then it gives me the opportunity to think of and remember and have consideration for the pain dwelling inside the person who hurt us or who we thought we needed to forgive. Take a minute to reflect on that possibility with me. The possibility that you could not only come to a place of being free of past hurts and seeming slights and negativity, that you could actually come to a place where you're strong enough to send love back to that person actively. Giving them the gift is giving yourself the gift. Forgiveness is a gift that we give ourselves. And forgiveness is more than just a word. Forgiveness is a tool that offers total freedom. But it requires a willingness to seek and see the Christ in ourselves and others. Whew. You know, it's amazingly difficult to do that, right? It's actually easier for me to see the Christ in John than it is to see the Christ in me. It's so beautiful when I look at John or Candace or Deb. It's just that they're radiantly beautiful. It's a little harder to see in myself and easier to feel contracted. But here's the thing, I can't really love John. I can't get beyond saying, oh, he's a nice guy and a hard worker. I can't get beyond admiring Deb for the way she just stepped right up this morning and stepped into the platform person if I haven't fully loved myself first. And I definitely can't forgive my father or my neighbor or that boss. That one time I had a boss 35, 40 years ago. There's still some part of me that was until very recently, that was letting him boss me around 40 years after I last had a job. As we use the tool of forgiveness to open and loosen and soften that space within ourselves. Okay, let me claim it for myself. As I use the tool of forgiveness to open and loosen and soften the space inside myself by giving love to another and forgiving all that is past and contracted and negative. As I embrace that forgiveness, as we embrace that forgiveness, we restore harmony within ourselves that radiates into the world around us. And that's the real gift. It's not just forgiving my dad so I can feel free and he can be free. It's that as I loosen that space between he and I, as you loosen that space between yourself and any unforgiven person in your relationship, you radiate love into the world and become a blessing to the world, which is what we're here to do. When I walked up here this morning, there was this little pink sticky already on the music stand, and someone left it some other time, and I just think it's perfect. Showing our love is why we're here. Showing our love is why we are here. You could have stayed at home and you could have gone golfing or gone shopping, just had a nice long nap this morning. But instead, you're here in the sanctuary, you're watching online. You're gathering in spirit so you can send love and receive love in community out into the world. The story is bigger than just you, I say to myself over and over again. Because I like to think it's all about me. I really do. My wife would be the first to tell you that. But I love knowing that I am free and unlimited to move into a larger expression of myself and be a healing power in the world. Because it's so easy to think that it's also negative, that the ugliness in Uvalde and the violence in Ukraine and the horror of the greed on Wall Street and the environmental climate change, it's all hopeless and terrible. And if I can let myself stay there, or I can remember that I am a radiating center of Christ consciousness. And to the extent that I am willing and able to forgive myself and others, there is more and more love to radiate in that way. And I think it matters. I'd like to close with this little story about a group of folks who were on a big ship crossing the ocean on a pleasure cruise, and then there was a big storm, and only 3 people survived and got washed up on a desert island. They didn't know each other. They'd just been fellow passengers on the ship, but they got to know each other because there was nobody but them on this deserted desert island. They needed each other to find food. They had to learn how to fish. They had to learn, and they had to boost each other up into the coconut trees so they could get some coconuts to go with the fish, and that's about all they had to eat. And they had to figure out how to get shelter. And after a while, they became pretty good friends. And we're doing all right, but they were stuck on a desert island. One day they were all walking on the beach, and one of them saw a bottle laying there in the sand. He picked it up and brushed the sand off, and poof, out popped the genie. And the genie said, "Oh, thank you for liberating me from that bottle. I've been in there for ages. I'm so grateful. I'll give each of you a wish, anything your heart desires." Well, the first guy said, "Man, I am sick and tired of eating fish and coconut and fish. I would like to be in New York at one of those fancy restaurants having the finest food that could be imagined." Poof, he disappears. The second guy says, "Well, I've always wanted to be a rich and famous movie star living in Hollywood, and get to know Robert Redford and Julia Roberts and all those beautiful people and be one of them. Yeah, that's what I want to do." Poof. Third guy thought, "Oh, man, New York, eating really good food, being with us, or being a movie star in California. I don't know. It's supposed to sound good. I wish my buddies were here to help me make up my mind." Poof! Poof! It's a goofy story. But we, as students of Unity Principles, know that our thoughts, our actions, our feelings have power in the world. Let us join together at the feast of the table of the family reunion, feeling our oneness, our gratitude for the gifts of our family of origin, for the gifts of this community, for the gifts of life. At least, that's my invitation, and I'm sticking to it.
Step out on the water, release your faith. Every step is stronger. Step out on the water.